Before we start, I would like to say thank you to many of the people who are really deserving of many, many thank yous. Introduced you to the board and the staff yesterday. We also had a conference planning group, and I would like to introduce you to them, although some of them are still asleep. But Susan Lucchetti, one of our key conference planners, Fred Jennings, whom you met yesterday with the economics talk, Christopher Haynes. Clarice, are you here? Clarice Evans. And Eddie Robbins, who isn't here. Sophia Gonzalez. You all heard Sophia yesterday. She did great work, especially organizing a lot of volunteers from the Harvard Extension School Environmental Club. And Bill Reed, who is busy drinking his coffee. We've had incredible work at the book table from Brian Cartwright. Earth to Brian Cartwright. And his partner, Suzanne Rozak. Suzanne, are you here today? There's Suzanne. And Helen Snively, also, who I don't see her. And John Minkle, who has been our stalwart Facebook live streamer. And we've had several hundred views on Facebook. So welcome all of you out there in Facebook land. And if you're out there, you have to applaud louder because we can't hear you from here. But we'll try. And let's see. And of course, our advertisers and exhibitors who are in the program, and our sponsors who generously made this possible. So thanks to all of them, and now for something completely different, Jim Laurie.
So can you hear me from this mic here? No. Can't hear it? Turn it on.
It's on.
Turn it on. You can hear it now? Hear it in the back? Okay. Okay. Now I'm in front of the... I wanted to start a video here. And we don't have any sound for the video, so that's kind of good because we don't have any human voices. But I wanted to bring a protist to the conference, and I brought some paramecium. And I just thought, imagine being a paramecium and you're trying to learn how to eat bacteria. And do you learn from your mom, or how do you do this? So. And you can see these are ciliated critters. And you see the bacteria are really tiny, swimming around in there. And they're making food vacuoles. And this will split off after a while. But yeah, we'd hear Mozart or somebody, Vivaldi or something while we're listening. So. But how they got this kind of resolution, it's amazing to me. So. Oh, there's a channel that goes in. It's called the oral groove, and then you start making these vacuoles, and that right here you can see the flow. And they're just collecting bacteria, and then they'll add acid and break down the bacteria, and that's their food. So, and then you see it's broken off now. And then their waste, they'll make other vacuoles that'll be their waste, and they'll expel those. So this is a protist. This is a eukaryotic cell but it's a single cell. You know, it doesn't have to communicate with other cells. Whereas you have a body that has a lot of cells, and they all have to cooperate with each other. So. Now, what happens if there's amoeba around? They'll actually enclose the paramecium, and that'll be fine. The paramecium will be kind of calm until the amoeba adds the acid to consume the paramecium. And if well, there was a lot of shock in the classroom that day, because by that time they were pretty friendly with the paramecium, and now the amoeba comes and spoils everything. So I have some pictures here. This is if you never thought about what protists are, and that also includes the algae. The algae don't have a vascular system, so even if they're 6 feet tall, they get all their energy and nutrients from the ocean, and they don't need to have a vascular system to communicate. So they're considered, they're not considered plants in the way of figuring things out. And Darwin had this intuition that we were all connected, and so he had a tree structure. And if you went back far enough, you'd be related to everybody. But the tree structure was kind of pretty simplistic as time went on. And this is where Margulis came in, is she said there were symbioses going on, and there were at least 4 different kinds of bacteria that made up complex cells. And the mitochondria are one of those. That does your energy in all your cells. In plants, it's also the chloroplast. But see, the structure is coming together and fusing. And, you know, so that was something she wanted to consider. Now what's happening now with looking at genes a lot closer is we're finding out Nick Lane is saying that the movement of genes is much, much more. There's much more interaction of gene movement than we ever thought. And so this is like the latest story. But this is tough stuff, so I have a hard time with that. But and then this is a book that just came out. This is a guy, David Montgomery, studied civilization crashes, and he wrote about the Dust Bowl and things like that. And then he started thinking about, well, how do you rebuild soil? And his wife started a garden, and Bickley, and Gina liked that. But he kind of talks about how we got sidetracked with our chemical agriculture. He talks about the history of the chemical industry and some of those things, because he's a really good writer about history. And then out of the blue, Anne got cancer. And they had to change their diet, and they began eating mostly from the garden. And she got a lot better. And, you know, and she wrote the part about the microbiome. So here's part of it writing about biodiversity in the soil, and then they go right, you know, and you're going into a cow's gut and stuff like that, and then the second part is the microbiome inside the human. And so the two together, it's quite a powerful thing. And then there's one more book that's on the Margulis side of understanding evolution, and it was, this guy is Josh Middledorf, and he's an expert. He studied how humans could slow down their aging process. So a lot of people are interested in that. But he was having a hard time interpreting the data and stuff like that. So to think from the symbiosis point of view, he got this writer that's pretty good. His name's Dorian Sagan, who happened to be the son of Carl Sagan and Lynn Margulis. And he does what his mom did. He goes around and finds these great ideas and tries to figure out how do we get them out to the public. It's called Cracking the Aging Code. One of the big things it says is if you eat a lot less, you know, that's probably the biggest indicator of living longer. So, you know, starvation is not good, but if you're close to starvation, you know, there's a reason to keep you around in your species. And the big difference is the gene people say, well, it's selfish, it's a selfish gene. You know, it's all about genes, and it's all about individuals. And the symbiosis side says, no, populations have an effect on evolution. And so that's the debate. And where do you come down on that? You see, I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, but we ought to have some discussion about that. So then the other thing, we're having an extinction episode, and the insects are having a hard time. And so the question is, you know, dung beetles are dying all over the world. And they used to be everywhere. And then the question somebody's supposed to ask is, what do they eat? And good, you laughed. Okay, great. We need more poop on the ground. And then the other thing that we're missing is the fungi. And I had a video I wanted to show where they had this beekeeper, and the bees are dying, and they've got varroa mites on their backs, like Hayden was talking about yesterday, one of the kids. And Paul Stamets, the fungi guy, has figured out that the bees like to go into the woods and get mycelium, and they suck something out of the mycelium, and it's part of their immune system. That the fungi are part of the insect immune system. And so if you put them on the back of a truck and take them into Concreteville, they might have a hard time. So that's something else. So insects and protists and fungi, those are pretty neat things. So then I'll do something boring. I'll go to my talk, and I probably should turn this off. So now can you hear me now? Is it better or worse? Better. Okay, good. And let's see if I can find my presentation. Does anybody remember that this is the climate reckoning that we're in? We've had a lot of great. I've learned a lot this week, and I was really excited to see the people putting down substrate for the oysters. That was really cool, and thought, why don't we do stuff like that? And so I'll start with some numbers. Halley's Comet, and I say Halley's Comet. A lot of people say Halley, and I think Halley said it Halley. So we used to have a debate about that. But Newton figured out the gravity equations, and Halley predicted that the comet would come back, and that was in 1682. And they didn't live to see it come back, but it came back right on schedule. And the parts per million in the atmosphere then was about 278. So that's what you should know. So that was a big celebration. Halley's Comet came back on time, and everybody celebrated. And now we had the math ability to explain the universe. And everything would be good after that. So how are we doing on that one, And then 75 years later, see, the CO2 level went up, but it didn't go up that much, and Mark Twain was born. And he said he didn't remember the comet the last time, and he'd never live to see the next one. And of course, in 1910, he's still alive, but the week that Halley's Comet, the Earth went through the comet's tail, and Mark Twain died. So he was a one Halley phenomenon. And look, it still went up, but not a lot. It's still under 300. Been under 300 for several million years. And then look what happened in 1986. See, that was a big change. And Challenger and Chernobyl blew up that same year. So that was a pretty rough year. The comet was not smiling that year. And then the kids, the Symbiosis team kids are going to meet in 2061 to watch the comet. And it's going to come on Linus's birthday. And so they're going to meet at his house. He doesn't know where he's going to live in 2061. Oh. But look at the number that comes up here. And this is when I freaked out, and I'm going to try to give you a sense of why that number is really scary to me. And then, of course, the next time it might be up to 700. This is business as usual. This is not accelerating. This is just the pace that it's going now. So, how many people knew that? Good. So now there they are. They were up against the Russian map of Europe here. And Annie, this is last year, so Annie, she's got a lot more hair now, but Hayden cut her hair, so you probably don't recognize him. That was yesterday, after all. But what are we doing now in 2017? We have a major extinction episode. We have soil erosion, 75 billion tons, 10 tons per human. It's worse than it was in the 80s when we were starting to pay attention. And this is coming from Cornell. Land desiccation, the land's drying out, lots of fires, that makes sense, and 400 dead zones in the oceans. And that's not the scary part. The scary part to me is the Arctic Ocean is free of summer ice. And we're starting to see methane come out in huge amounts. Is a methane spike. The last extinction episode came, the high point was during a methane spike. It doesn't last very long, maybe only 100 years or so. But the temperature was 12, 15, maybe 17 degrees warmer than now, centigrade. So I thought, let's not do that. So here you got the poem, remember the poem. There are those that are trying to set fire to our world. We are in danger. There's time only to move slowly. We have to let the fungi mature before we take it out. We have to let the baby mature before we have a baby. And then there's no time not to love. This is your planet. Yellowstone's your park. And it's time that we started speaking up and working together. So that's mostly my speech, but then I thought I'd give some details. This is the East Siberian Shelf. This is actually Siberia here. It's hard to see, but the East Siberian Shelf is very shallow. And some people estimate right now, it's hard to measure because it's so hard to do studies up there, but they think this is the amount of methane coming out of the East Siberian Shelf, and this is the rest of the world's methane burping. And the interesting thing about this, it's as much as all the rest of them, but it didn't happen at all in the year 2000. There was nothing, it was all covered with ice all the time. Other places, methane breaks down pretty fast because it's usually pretty deep. And there's microbes that really use up the methane in those deep waters before it even hits the surface a lot of times. So, but this is a very shallow, it's like 50 meters on average, something like that. So that's something to think about. And so the Russians and the people from University of Alaska are kind of wondering if we stay at 400 parts per million, is that about a 5% per decade chance of a methane spike? And hardly anybody's talking about this. And I thought, well, all right, maybe it's 1%. But if the Arctic starts to warm and we go up to 500 parts per million, is it 10% per decade? Is it 20% per decade if we go up to 600? So it's time to turn it around. And here's the spike 55 million years ago or so. See, this is 12 degrees above now. And then it started going down. This was a huge azolla. Azolla started growing like crazy and making the permafrost in the Arctic. And it became like 12 to 20 feet deep. And that's starting to melt right now, you see. This is kind of interesting. But so the azolla event happened here. Then they kind of bounced around for a while at about 4 degrees warmer than now. And then this part is grasses evolved in the Miocene, and grazing animals and grasses co-evolved. And it was all that poop and all those dung beetles and all that carbon going down into the ground. And eventually we got so low, maybe 180 parts per million at times, and we're 4 degrees below where we are now. And that's when human big brains evolved during the ice ages. So we're better equipped to handle an ice age than we are an Eocene. So this is what the azolla event, back then Asia and North America were a lot closer, so they started moving apart. Iceland's still trying to move apart, it's separating. But the Arctic was kind of a freshwater pool at that time, and so there's people thinking, well, how do we restart that process? And of course, you know the poop paucity predicament when he took all the big animals off the land. So I thought Dee Dee had that great quote yesterday, and I'm trying to remember. It's all the animals are in prison in the feedlots. All the plants are thirsty. They're on welfare. There you go. They're subsidized. I like that. And all the microbes are dead. So that's why we've got a problem. And how do we turn that back on? And this is we're not in the ice age anymore. We're in the desiccation age. We're drying out the continents. And I saw caliche in Dallas in an area that gets 40 inches of rain. You know that they're down. There's no organic matter anymore. It's down to the caliche, the minerals. There you are. I heard the voice. Hi, Dee Dee. So how did biology cool the Earth? So that's your task. It's a fascinating thing. I've been working on it for 30 years, and it's a lot of fun. And all these species are your friends. And this is when the the water used to go into the ground, and there were probably 5 billion prairie dogs in North America. And if you were a raindrop and you were trying to get together with a lot of other raindrops and make a flood, it's really hard when you got all these holes in the ground. That's the way it used to be out there. And this was what I didn't understand is it used to be all the way to the Sierras. Nevada was a grassland. New Mexico was a grassland. And why not do that again? So here we are. The CO2 levels in the atmosphere are going up about 2.5 parts per million per year. That's about 5 billion tons, 5 gigatons. So we know that number. We know that we're burning fossil fuels about 10 gigatons. So 5 of it's going down somewhere. It's either going down in the ocean or in the land, and that's harder to measure. So I just put it in there as, either or both. And then I thought, well, what do I want it to be? We're at 407 when I did this. It might be a little bit more right now. But here's the goal. By the time the comet comes back, we want to have, what if we had a 20% reduction in fossil fuels and we got down to 8? So that'd make it a little bit easier. That'd be great because people are working hard on that. And maybe we're going solar and maybe we're going wind. But we need to do something else. And the interesting thing is if we have a big difference in this versus this, if the net is going into the ground, it's going to release the tension on the equilibrium in the ocean, and the ocean will start burping up CO2. And that's a good thing because then you start reducing the shellfish stress from ocean acidification. So, we need the mussels and clams and whatever. So that's minus 20 here, plus 8, plus 4, that's plus 8, or minus 8. That's about 4 parts per million. If we could reduce it 4 parts per million per year. So that's the number. We have to come up with 20 gigatons going into the ground. That's the task. And so it starts with Alan Savory because he was the first one to talk about this. And he said, well, there's 12 billion acres of deserts and grasslands, deserts that used to be grasslands. And he thought, well, if we got a ton of carbon per acre, that'd be 12, we'd be working on the negative side. And I thought, well, maybe we could get half the ranchers and people out in the drylands to learn about this stuff and get animals back on the land. And maybe we could average one ton per, these restored acres. Well, that's 6 billion tons right there. And maybe the regenerative farming, they're in wetter climates, so maybe they can learn how to put 2 tons down per acre. Okay, so maybe half of the farming acreage. And then forests, maybe we figure out to have a restoration of forests and we have a more, not monocultures, but also we get more wetlands in the forest areas. If we have 10% wetlands everywhere, the water tables are never going to disappear on us. And the immune systems of the plants, I think, would be better off. And the fungi systems, too. And then here's the kicker. The wetlands, the number is much bigger. It's probably 8, 10, 12, but I put a 6 in here. We need to create a billion acres of wetlands. We could probably do 2, but now here's the problem. People thought that beavers show up when it's wet. And what we're finding out is that no, it's wet when beavers show up. It's all backwards. And everybody, thinks that we have to figure out where the lines are and all that kind of stuff. There are people that are figuring out how to manage beavers so that they can be around and the water can rise. And so it's largely about managing water. If we manage water well, the carbon will come. And then you remember the living shorelines? I thought, well, all right, since the oceans are rising, what do we have to do? If the oceans rise, you've got some choices. You've got to build a wall. You've got living shorelines, or you can wait and see. And see is SEA, you see. So you got the joke. So we can wait and see, and Boston will be underwater. Or we can build a wall, and the ocean will be crashing against it, and the wall's not going to last very long. The New Orleans project, and Anna Maria said yesterday it was $18 billion to get to sea level now. You see, if it rises another 4 or 5 feet, because, we haven't done anything, and it's probably inevitably going to do that because the oceans are just very warm right now. And it's going to take, we're going to have to cool the continents before the oceans start to cool off. And then I thought, maybe we can figure out how to do something with the Arctic permafrost. I'm not as understanding about these two, so I was kind of cautious. Living shorelines can take down a lot of carbon, seagrasses and Spartina marsh and so forth. So these numbers could be bigger. But here, look what we got. We got 26 billion tons, or 24. So we beat our 20, our goal of 20. And so I had some case studies, and I thought, all right, everybody wants some real numbers. Well, Richard Teague, a couple of years ago was saying he had a lot of examples between 1 to 2 tons in pretty dry places. So that beats our 1 ton per acre. And Stephen Ethelbaum has done stuff with the wetlands, and he's getting like 7 to 12 tons per acre on his projects. These are managed projects. These are expensive a lot of times. But out in Susie Creek in Nevada, they saw within a few years the water tables rise 2 or 3 feet, and it became just muck. And nobody's gone out there to do that study and find out how much carbon that is. But I would think it's probably 10 tons an acre every year, and for 15 years. And, I think if all of Nevada was all those creeks and in the Dakotas and so forth, well, that's well past 6, which I put on the other one. Greg Judy's does his earthworm thing, and he's getting 17 earthworms per square foot. He's trying for 25. And his soil is rising. Instead of deepening soil with fungi, it's uppening. And, in a decade, it'll be several inches. And, you figure an inch, that's 10 tons of carbon per acre. Every inch you go up. So it just, I think this is doable. Joel Salatin, they've seen on their farm, the soil's risen 12 inches. But then Gabe Brown came along and finally realized that if you want to grow crops, you also want to have animals in the system. And you want to have cover crops in the wintertime. You want to have the ground covered all the time, but with something. And you said 20-something tons per hectare, which is about 8 tons. I got the same calculation, I got the same numbers. So this is really exciting. And then one of the other rules is you want to have 10% wetlands, no matter where you are. So that's so I just thought, well, here's a way you could do it. We're worried about the methane spike. The G19, they dropped the U.S. out of the G20. So the G19 begins its biodiversity restoration plan with New England, Minnesota, Cascadia, and most of Native American tribes join they decide they don't need to use the federal government anymore. This is a scenario. I'm making this up. This did not actually happen, but I'm just saying, start to use your imagination and think, how could we get it? How could we get there? How did Eisenhower figure out D-Day with 20 different languages being spoken, and there was a wall that he had to go past? So then, by 2029, we can really focus on fire, and one of the ways you focus on fire is you start working really hard on increasing your wetlands and getting your water tables to rise. And you really start trying to cut your trawling. And so I put these 40% in here. What if we could reduce chemicals by 40% and trawling by 40% per decade? And then things start to come back. Billion grazing animals to reverse desertification, living shorelines and permafrost. And oh my gosh, look at this. We're going down by 40 per decade. Well, that's 4 parts per million a year. That's the scenario. Now, what I encourage you to do is write your own scenario. Because I don't have the final word on any of this. But I kind of like this. I like a world with a lot of mycelium and a lot of dung beetles and a lot of water infiltration and a lot of hooves on the ground, like it used to be. And Linus said, well, we got to quit doing lawns yesterday. Here's the turf grass that you put out there that is so thick that water can't penetrate. It takes an hour to take an inch of water. But big blue stem that he was calling about, well, it might take a minute or two. I mean, look at this. Buffalo numbers, there were so many buffalo that about 4 hooves are breaking each square foot every year. So the hooves of grazing animals are designed to get the water into the ground and grow more grass. And there they are. Let's, where's Jane Hammer? Jane's an expert at dung beetle, you know, that's one of her totem species. Dung beetles used to be virtually everywhere except in the permafrost. It's hard to do it in the permafrost. Mycorrhizal fungi, that's the brains of the outfit. Don't judge intelligence by how close it is to human. Somebody said that recently, Annie. And there's the guy, the mushroom guy, fungi.com. So I put a lot of books out and pictures and things like that. And then, so what's my weak link? My weak link is ancient forests, and we got an ancient forest. Joan Maloof is coming. So, and look at that, fungi to bacteria ratio. So here's on the Cheyenne River Reservation, and all this clover from the year before is turning brown, and it needs to be grazed. And the problem is water. But down the hill, you see the cottonwoods growing. The water's only a few inches below the surface a lot of the year. And if they had beaver there, but right now to have beaver in the tribe is so poor that a beaver is $50, you see, for the pelt. And hopefully someday, I mean, there's people that want to see the beaver come back, raise the water tables, and start consuming this grass with a lot more animals. And even in places like Nevada with no wood, it starts to look kind of cool and slow down the snow melt. And the fish come back and the mussels come back. Carol Evans is finding mussels in every stream that she's looked at so far in the area. California could rehydrate with beavers. If it was 10% wetlands in the Central Valley, they'd be a lot happier there. But the almond groves, they say, well, I'd have to give up 10% of my almonds if 10%. And I say, well, how much are you losing now? You know, it's kind of an interesting thing. And here's Michael Kravchuk, and this guy's really talented, standing up here and pounding on this post. I don't know how he does it. But even in forests, if we could slow down this gouge in the ground, that might be part of the immune system of the forest. The water's getting so low that the trees have to really go to get water. And the fungi systems might not be as healthy. And and then here's where the beaver used to be, all the way into China and Mongolia. They were trapped out in Asia in the 1300s. What if there were 100 million beaver in North America and 100 million beaver in Asia? Would that make a difference? Would we rehydrate those two continents? Would the Aral Sea come back? And where is this? Everybody knows by now, probably. Chernobyl, 1986. Remember, we had Chernobyl, and the Comet was not happy. But then humans left, and wow, we've got moose, we've got wolf, we've got beaver, we've got otter, and we've got Przewalski horses, the Polish horses that were going extinct everywhere. And so there's your beaver thoughts. Build a wall or wait and see. Or we could have living coastlines. And then I talked about the oceans, and this is a planktonic snow that used to happen everywhere on the Maine coast. That's all the eggs and larvae and so forth, and all the fish came to eat this stuff. And now the fish don't come very often. So, and can you imagine what trawling would do to this? See how close they're packed together. But if you quit trawling, this comes back within a decade or so. And these little algae-eating fish, we're trying to get them to come back. And Rachel Carson said we shouldn't be destructive. And I thought, well, we ought to teach this stuff. So anyway, I'm willing to do that anytime anybody wants to, and I'll give up the podium for a while. So anyway.